Welcome back, everyone, to the Daily Fantasy Pivot on RotoCurve. You may notice there's only three of us today. We are just going with the three amigos. Nick Menzio had prior commitments. We're not sure what those are, but we're gonna step up in his place. We're gonna up our usage, and I think all of us will succeed tonight. So you want to start us in your DFS fantasy show host league for sure. This is the Daily Pivot, as I mentioned. We're a show aimed to teach the masses, specifically the beginners, how to play the game of daily fantasy basketball that we love so much. Don't forget to check out the PGA free roll this week. That's rotocurve.com/free roll/. You can find the NBA tools on rotocurve.com, and we actually just added a pretty exciting tool. Josh, you want to talk about what we added?
Yeah, this tool is one of my favorite things I think I've seen out there, and of course, like everything else on RotoCurve right now, it's free. Basically, what we have for you guys is I'm going to bring it up here now for you. It's a tool that basically gives everybody their full breakdown of all the players. And what I mean by that is you see their points per game, their rebounds, assists, steals, like that. Everybody knows stuff about that. But what this tool we have is called the DFS NBA points per minute leaders. It gives you every player what they did yesterday, the last 10 days, and the last 30 days. Now, what's so special about that? We have it broken down into DraftKings points per minute and FanDuel points per minute. It gives you their games and their minutes as well. So with all of that information, you can look at who's been playing very well. And, of course, we always have our Minute Movers tool, which mentions who's been playing more or less minutes. So if you can combine those two things, you can really find out a lot about players that you may not know about just because of recent trends. So taking a look at those trends is exactly what this tool is used for. So be sure to go over and check it out.
Yeah, I love the per minute. The use of that as a tool for fantasy basketball, because you see all these guys step into roles and you're just like, what kind of player is he? And while the type of player matters, what really matters for the daily fantasy game is how many fantasy points per minute. I mean, if they're a rebounder, if they're a shooter, it doesn't particularly matter to us as long as they get fantasy points. So there's that. And now let's welcome in Benny Ricciardi, not wearing a sweater today. He decided to go casual for us, I guess. What's the deal? It's not Casual Friday yet. You decided to do it for Wednesday?
Well, I actually got a Raglan baseball shirt on because right after we finished the show here, my 7-year-old has his first baseball practice today, so I have to run down and help out Coach. So I'm all in my baseball gear, ready to go throw some grounders and pitch a little bit of BP to 7-year-olds. So hopefully I get a strikeout or two today.
Look at that versatility with the outfit. That always makes it very easy. I guess mine is my dog walking outfit as well. So I'm going multi-purpose with mine today also. Let's get into the slate today. It's a pretty interesting one. Do you guys have any initial thoughts about it? I mean, there's a bunch of games that are fast-paced. We've got Kings-Pelicans. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on tonight's slate? Is this looking like one where you want to fit multiple superstars, or do you see a lot of mid-tier guys that you think could make a lineup? Let's start with you, Josh.
The first thing I did when I looked at the slate this morning is just I'm astonished by the amount of stars playing all on the same night. Cousins, Westbrook, Curry, Durant, Harden, Paul, Davis, James. It's just, the list goes on and on and on. And we didn't even mention guys like Carmelo Anthony, like Kemba Walker, Karl Anthony Towns. There's a ton of excellent players that play basketball tonight. Now, fortunately, not all of them have elite matchups, so it did get a little bit easier. But honestly, just looking at the slate and all these points and possible chances for 50, 60, 70 burgers, you're almost looking at what has to be a stars and scrubs night, right?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely am looking at some of the lesser values. I mean, there are two big names that stand out to me that we'll get to, but, I mean, Durant and Cousins, we'll explain why, but those guys just are screaming to me as guys that need to be in my lineups. I'm trying to make them both work, but it's kind of a difficult task. Benny, why don't I ask you about this, because I haven't seen anyone really talking about this today, that Tyrone Lue at the beginning of the week announced that he's going to sit starters this week. Is that, I mean, can you play any of them in cash in early lock sites, or are you just avoiding Kyrie, Love, and LeBron tonight?
I mean, I honestly didn't have any of those three really high up on my list anyway. But if I knew one of those three was going to sit, the other two would actually become more interesting. So In cash, I mean, if we don't know anything at lock time, I don't think you can take that chance on a site that you can't change it out on. But on the flip side of that, I think if you save some room for those guys on like a DraftKings where you can make some late swaps, if you find out that Love is out, I think that'll tick up Kyrie and LeBron. If you find out LeBron is out, that ticks up the other two. And, whichever one of them sits, the other two guys are going to wind up getting more usage, more shots. So you can kind of play it that way if you want to take the chance. But this is, when you ask Josh, if you were going to ask me if it's a Stars and Scrubs night, I was going to basically say that after March 1st, it kind of always is a Stars and Scrubs night for me in NBA. Because at this point in the season, we have so many viable 3 and 4K guys with everybody that's injured or sitting out or, just not playing for one reason or another. Last night you had Boogie Cousins like 60% owned in a lot of tournaments. Tournaments, not cash games. Cash games, he was 90% owned. Tournaments, he was 60% owned, even as the highest priced guy, because there were a half dozen guys at $35,000 to $4,000 on whatever site you're playing that you could have put in there, and you got 35 at a Brandon Jennings at min price. You got 31 at a Carl Landry at min price. Bismack Biyombo had 35 points at min price. So if there's all these guys that are going to give you 8 to 10x at min price nowadays, doesn't that kind of make it Stars and Scrubs whether you want it to be or not? There's really no reason to mess around with a lot of these mid-range guys when you can get the same 30 points out of a guy that's 4K. So I think it winds up lending itself to being Stars and Scrubs, because if you have 3 guys in your lineup that are 4K, well, now you got 8 or 9K to spend up at every other position, so you can go up and get some of the studs.
Yeah, I guess the question always is, which of those guys is it going to be in terms of the lesser ones? Because what I find most nights is, getting stars right, I don't want to call it easy, but it's a much easier task than getting these, $3,200 to $4,000 price guys on DraftKings, right? Because I think most nights, if you've got a good lineup going, they seem to be the ones that kill it. Honestly, it's you choose a guy like a Ray McCallum who's got 2 points through a half, or you choose the Briante Webbers or guys that you're taking a chance on, and they just don't get it done for you. While other people have got the Biombos of the world and the Jason Smiths who are just killing it. So I think that's maybe a theme of the show today is which guys we feel really good about that you can save some money on. Let's start at the point guard. I don't think I'm going to go very cheap at point guard today. There are 2 mid-range guys who I think I'm going to be nailing on. I think Drew Holiday is my favorite point guard yet again. How do you not love this matchup for him against the Sacramento Kings, the NBA's worst defense? It looks like no Norris Cole. We know no Eric Gordon. He dropped a 50-burger on him like literally last week. His usage is way up. The pace plays way up in this, so I think he connects every single dot for me. I know he's a little expensive some places. He's up to 14.5 on Fantasy Draft, 8,100 on DraftKings. But I think, him and Davis are the staples of that offense. Davis, if he guards Cousins, could be a threat for foul trouble. There's just so many things that are leading me Holiday's way. And the other one I want to mention is Isaiah Thomas, 7,300 on DraftKings, only up 200 from last night after dropping almost 47 fantasy points. The pace of this one's going to be great. So those are the 2 guys I'm pretty focused on for, honestly, both formats. Benny, who do you like at point guard?
Yeah, I actually wrote up Russell Westbrook today, and I know that everybody is going to be like, you got to be crazy. They're playing Boston. Boston's so good against their point guard defense. And that's all true, and I completely understand that. But none of those point guards that they've played and done well against are Russell Westbrook. Everybody's so excited about the Greek Freak because he has 4 triple-doubles since the All-Star break. Well, Westbrook has 4 triple-doubles in his last 8 games, and he's not a guy that gets you a 12, 10, and 10 triple-double. His triple-doubles are 22 points, 11 rebounds, 17 assists, 20 assists, 12 rebounds, 15 points. He's given you some monster numbers. He's had 60 fantasy points or more in 4 of his last 8 games as well. And for tournaments tonight, I think people are going to be off him because they look at that DVP and they see, oh, well, Boston's really good against them. And don't get me wrong, Avery Bradley's a great defender. Avery Bradley's probably going to be on him for large portions of this game. And I know you guys are both pretty big on Kevin Durant, and, we'll get to him and talk about him why. But the way Westbrook's been playing, he had a triple-double last night, or the last game. He had a big triple-double, and he only played 3 quarters, 26 minutes. This guy's playing out of his mind right now. Boston and OKC are both fast-paced teams. I expect to see even more than the 222 points Vegas expects in this game. So it might be contrarian, but that's the way you win tournaments. I'm actually paying up for Russell Westbrook tonight in my tournaments on DraftKings.
Yeah, I love Westbrook for tournaments. I agree with you. I mean, Bradley's a solid defender, but we're talking about maybe the quickest guy to ever play the game in terms of his first step. I mean, he's crazy athletic. They have no one really protecting the rim. But, between Bradley and Coach, what is his name?
Stevens?
Stevens, thank you. I lost it for a second. Coach Brad Stevens, one of the best from college. I wanted him to coach IU. He was considering it. But he's such a great coach, and Bradley's such a great defender that I think that's enough to take me off him in tournaments, or excuse me, in cash. But I think for that reason, you can also go with him in tournaments because you look at their lack of personnel against him. I think he's got a real shot at another triple-double in a fast-paced game. Josh, who do you like at the point guard position tonight?
It's interesting that you guys mentioned Westbrook and how quick he is on his first step. I'm actually going to go with the guy who I think is the fastest in the NBA besides Westbrook with the ball in his hands as my top point guard tonight, and that's John Wall against Chicago Bulls. This is a very fast-paced game. I love targeting Wizards games, especially guys like that against teams that really can't defend well. We know how bad Derrick Rose has been as a defender. He's one of the league leaders, I guess you could say, being league worst in plus-minus on defense. This game has a 2.2 plus rating on our games to target tool, and if those of you are familiar with that tool, that's a really high rating. And one of the things about Wall is, like Westbrook, he gets a lot of numbers in terms of points, assists, and rebounds, actually, for a guard, too. Now, he doesn't have that upside that Westbrook has of, like Benny mentioned, 25.12 points, or 25.12 boards and 19 assists. But he is the same kind of statistical player on a lesser basis. So for me, at about $1,500 cheaper, I'm going to be rolling with Wall and using that extra money to spend up at other positions.
Yeah, I actually have changed my opinion on a player just from listening to Benny in the last 10 minutes, to be honest. I had Marcus Smart written down, but now that I think of it, what I had written down for Turner is I think they're going to go with less three-guard lineups. Like yesterday they started Thomas, Smart, and Bradley. But if they're going to need Bradley guarding Westbrook, I think that means, they're going to need Turner or one of their bigger guys guarding Durant. I think that means Smart's the odd man out of the rotation tonight. Do you guys agree with that? I mean, I think I'm taking him off my list, and I'm focusing on Thomas, Turner, and maybe some of the other guys on the Celtics.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. I don't necessarily think that Smart's a guy that, like you said, is going to find his way in the lineup much because he has been playing a little bit with Turner, with Bradley, with Thomas, but he can't guard Kevin Durant, right?
Yeah, there's just, I mean, he's a good defender, but you can't give up, 8 inches in terms of Smart to Durant. You just can't do it. I think Turner's probably their best bet with what they've got left, but they don't have much left that can match up against them. Benny, did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to say the same thing that you just said right there. It's a big size mismatch, and we talked about this, I talked about it a little bit on the video earlier today. Durant is a legit, 6'10", 6'11". Smart is basically a combo point guard, shooting guard, 6'4" kind of guy. Durant also has been getting the ball more in the post lately, where he's just been going down and kind of posting up some of the smaller guys, and Westbrook's just kind of throwing it up for him to go up by the rim and kind of lay it in. They've been doing that a lot more often, and also with Durant being such a good shooter, as a shooter, if you're 6 or 7 inches bigger than the guy who's guarding you, you're going to be able to shoot over the top of them anytime you want. So they're going to have to get right up. Those guys, the smaller guys to guard Durant, are going to have to get literally right up on him in his hip pocket. And he's too good of a ball handler and has too big of a first step that he's just going to go right around those guys. So I expect a big game out of Durant tonight too, which I don't think precludes Westbrook from having a big game too. I mean, both of these guys have over 30% usage rates, and they're pretty much the two guys that handle almost all the scoring for OKC. We've seen them both go off before, and people don't play them together all that often. I really like the fact that you can put the two of them together for a tournament tonight. I think it might be a way to get some sneaky exposure and also make a roster that's kind of unique that other people won't have. And like I said, there's nothing that precludes both of them from going off for 50, 60 points.
All right, let's get to some of the tournament options tonight. Even though we already mentioned Westbrook, I think there are some other guys you can look at. How about Chris Paul, only at 8% ownership last night? That was intriguing to me because he's got such monster numbers against San Antonio, even though they're not quite the Kings or Warriors in terms of pace, and they're a good defensive team. I mean, Paul, especially without Griffin had dominated them, and now he looks at an tick in pace against the Houston Rockets. I mean, 69 fantasy points last game, and that's not even an anomaly. I mean, 48.25 and 41 in 3 games versus them without Griffin over the past 2 seasons. So he's been pretty consistently awesome even against Patrick Beverley. So while I would rather pay a little down in cash games, I think he's a great tournament option. I think we got to talk about Darren Collison in that Pelicans game. He sucked against them last week, so I would guess that a lot of people look at that and just go with that. But he did score, I think it was 22 points last night, looked really good. Rondo also was pretty mediocre in that last meeting versus the Pelicans. I would guess one of them gets it done tonight. My preference would be Collison at a much cheaper price. And let's talk about Brandon Jennings. I mean, if he starts tonight, we have to consider him, right, Josh?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I don't think any of us really want to have a guy like Jennings in our lineup just because of how volatile he is. But that volatility gives him really good upside, as we saw last night. I think he had 11 assists, which is a lot for a guy like him because he's been known as a guy all the way back to Oak Hill in high school. It's a guy that just did not pass the basketball. With the guys around him, with the shooters around him, with Fournier, of course, Oladipo, they had Jason Smith hitting some mid-range jumpers last night as well. I think he's gotten more comfortable with passing the basketball. So for me, that definitely is something that you want to look at for him because we know he can score. Those assists are just going to get him more fantasy points, especially at that price. So I don't mind rolling him out there in tournament lineups because then you can afford the Durants, the Westbrooks, or even the Cousins.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of news here. Kelly Olynyk will play tonight. He's been out for a little bit. And I think that kind of puts a cap on Jerebko tonight, who I was on last night due to the Crowder injury. But I'm looking at this. Jerebko minutes per game this season with Olynyk and without Olynyk, 13.7 with him and 18 without him. So I think Olynyk's going to eat into his minutes tonight. He is only 3,100 and did have a good game last night. But I think if you were at all considering him in cash, this pretty much nixes that. I think he's tournament only, even though he's going to have a step up and roll without Crowder. Anything else any of you guys want to say about the point guard position? I think we've pretty much covered it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple other cheap options that you guys can look for. Tony Douglas, depending on how things work out with Norris Cole, might be somebody who's starting and getting minutes. I don't really love him. I don't think he's very safe, but I think for a tournament, if you're looking for a salary saver, he could be one of those guys. Marcus Smart, we kind of mentioned. I agree that I don't think this is a spot for him to have a big game or play a ton of minutes, but on some sites he's still way too cheap at like below $4,000, like a couple $100 off the minimum floor. Over there, he might be a viable guy because I do still think he's going to play 24 to 28 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes in this one. And then there was one other guy. Oh, and Ray McCollum as well. If Lance Stevenson's out, we know that they have 4 or 5 guys that are out that I saw earlier on today. So you really got to keep an eye on that Memphis, team. They only had 7 guys even healthy after the last game, and I think one of the guys that actually played last game, I think they said Vince Carter might be out, Lance might be out, Zebo's probably still out, Conley's still out. I mean, if there's only 7 or 8 guys there, these guys at min price, sooner or later they got to play some minutes. Like I said, I don't really love them. I would really hope Elk Payton was out. I think Brandon Jennings is probably my favorite. But all of these other cheap guys are viable swerves to use in the tournament if you're trying to fit in 2 or 3 of the studs that we've talked about today.
Yeah, I really do not want to play Briante Weber, who scored 5 real points in 2 games. I honestly, McCallum struggled at the beginning of that last game. Yeah, I know. You're probably going to allude to the LeBron James news, I assume, correct?
Yeah, so Kyrie's now in play at point guard for me as well.
Yeah, we alluded to it at the beginning of the show that the Cavaliers may rest someone. It turns out LeBron James is that guy. How about Kevin Love against Dirk Nowitzki, too? I mean, I think they're both firmly in play now. When we get to power forward, maybe we can go over that. But I think that changes things a lot. Maybe even J.R. Smith. I don't think I can do it because I do like some of the other shooting guards, but for tournaments, maybe that takes him up a notch as well. Let's move on to shooting guards. I'll let you guys start this. Benny, why don't you start since I have very limited options at the position tonight?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all have very limited options. I think one thing we can agree on is it's not the greatest position tonight. So let me throw a couple names out there for you guys. To start off with, where I can afford to do it, I think I will have a little more Harden exposure than other people. He's playing the Clippers. He probably is going to draw either some J.J. Redick defense, maybe some Wes Johnson defense. I mean, there aren't a lot of good wing defenders that the Clippers have that they can even throw at him. It should be a high-paced game. And like you said, it's such a bad position today that I think he is head and shoulders above all the other options. The only other guy that I was kicking around, and I ultimately decided I don't want to do it, is Jimmy Butler. His price on some of these sites is a little bit too expensive. I don't think I'd use him on FanDuel or DraftKings. On some of the other sites, like a fantasy draft, I think he might be okay. There are a couple other sites where he's not too expensive that I think I would be, interested in kind of getting some exposure to him. Depending on what site you're playing on, if Lance Stevenson plays and he's listed as a shooting guard, he's probably one of my favorite options that you could roll out there. Again, short rotation. They only got 7 or 8 guys. Lance might play a little point guard as well because Briante Weber, McCollum, all these other guys they're rolling out there really just aren't doing it. So I could see him having a 30, 35-point fantasy game like he's put up a couple times in the past. And then after that, I mean, you're basically looking at, the only other guy that's really on my radar is Oladipo. If Elf Payton is out and Vucevic is out, you got to think that Oladipo does something similar to what he did last game, where his usage is going to be up, his shot attempts are going to be up, his scoring, his minutes. So, again, I mean, it's kind of slim pickings, but those are really the guys that I'm looking at right now. If a viable punt option opened up, I would be perfectly okay punting this position. So that J.R. Smith thing is a little bit interesting to me now. I'll have to look into that and see if I can spend that money somewhere else.
Yeah, Collacchi, what are your thoughts at the position? I mean, I kind of with Benny where there's a few names. I've got a little bit different than he does, but I agree on Jimmy Butler for sure. But what are you doing at shooting guard tonight? Because it's not easy.
No, it's not. And real quick, just before we got into that, Marcus Smart will start and have Kevin Durant duties early, so that definitely bumps up Kevin Durant's value. And Iman Shumpert and Tristan Thompson will start. We'll talk about that later because I do think that's going to be an interesting game now with the 2 small lineups. But going back to shooting guard, I'm glad Benny talked about Harden because I think this is one of the things that we may disagree on tonight. It's not often that it happens, but I'm going to be completely off of James Harden tonight simply because of how the Clippers play him. When you watch the Rockets a lot, they run a ton of pick and roll. Like basically when Harden has the ball, that's basically their go-to play. They use it a lot. The Clippers are one of the only teams in the NBA that doubles Harden off that pick and roll basically all the time, and that has proven his fantasy point usage has been way down. He has never, against the Clippers in his entire career, gotten to 5x on FanDuel. His price is $10,500, I believe, right now, or $10,300. Either way, he's never gotten to 5x against them, and that's basically due to how they defend him in the pick and roll. Because when he does that, usually that opens up 2 guys that are open because of the way that the pick and roll works with guys rotating on defense. Harden gets the pick. He goes to his right, they double team him. He passes to the left, the other people slide, and then they have to let somebody else open on the other side of the court, and that leads for 2 passes. 2 passes in the NBA is not an assist. That's only in the NHL. And that's one reason why Harden never gets the fantasy points that he probably should deserve, because that hockey assist is definitely a good basketball play, but it's not an assist in the NBA and it's not fantasy points. So that's the main reason why I'm off him tonight.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've looked at Harden's numbers before against the Clippers, and I was wondering if it was I actually assumed it was mostly a scheme type thing. I hadn't looked as closely into it as you did, but now it makes a whole lot of sense that the double team's coming, because a lot of nights, the common player will look, hey, my guy is sucking tonight. He'll see a Karl Anthony Towns, but they won't watch the game where he'll get the ball in the post and a double team will immediately come. And so he'll have to pass out of it as a smart basketball play. And that's what we kind of have to look for in the daily fantasy game, is which of these guys is going to have that night and who's going to benefit. So I think you're right. Harden probably going to see some of that. He's still viable in tournaments, but for that reason, I like some of the other guys on the team better who are going to benefit from him passing out of it. I was looking up the Cavs in the meantime. They have some pretty sizable boosts in usage without LeBron James. Let's just go Irving 26.5 to 38%, so a 12 percentage point boost. Kevin Love's actually isn't that much. It's from basically 22 to 23. in terms of usage. So that's a little bit interesting to me. And then J.R. Smith, 17 to basically 23. So that's a 6 percentage point. So it actually looks like Kyrie and J.R. Smith, in terms of pure usage alone, get the bigger boosts than Kevin Love. But then again, Kevin Love probably has the best matchup of the three, so you got to take that into consideration. All right, let's go into my shooting guards. Collacchi, I made fun of you last show. Now I'm eating my words. Contavious
You're
Caldwell.
doing it. KCP.
Contavious, let's talk about that. And it actually fits in with what I just said, because I think it's going to be a tough matchup for Reggie Jackson against Atlanta and their point guard defense. I think theirs is scheme, but it's also the fact that, their guys are pretty good defenders, and that's going to open up some production for some of their other guys. I'm sure we'll get to Andre Drummond. That's a guy who's going to benefit. But Contavious Caldwell-Pope, who basically, hovers around 40 minutes. If Reggie Jackson's being shut down and they're playing some good defense at power forward position, then I think KCP is going to have to produce more than usual. JJ Redick is a guy that I really like tonight, and I actually really like him and their small forward, and I'm trying to decide which one I want to use everywhere, because I think there's a possibility not only that one goes off, but they both go off against the Rockets that are pretty weak defensively to both positions. But, I mean, you look at the Redick and Crawford conundrum, and really it's been Redick the one that gets it done against Houston. He scored at least 19 points in all three matchups against them without Blake Griffin, and he scored a whopping 40 real points against them earlier this season. He did shoot 75%, so I don't think that's sustainable, but I mean, 40 points in a matchup's got to put him on the radar. It's going to be a quick-paced game. They struggle against shooting guards, so I think Redick is firmly in my cash game consideration and even tournament today. Evan Fournier, you mentioned Victor Oladipo. I just want to mention Fournier too. He's listed as shooting guard a lot of places, but he'll benefit if those guys are out. And I liked Evan Turner, but now that he's not starting, he's very, very risky once again. So I think he's tournament only. I think my cash plays at the position are going to be cheap. I'm going to go one of KCP, Redick, or Fournier. Does anyone have anything else to say about the shooting guard position?
Well, with Amon Shumpert starting now, I think he gets a little bit interesting because he is literally dirt cheap minimum price all over the place. So I haven't looked into it because, honestly, before 5 minutes ago, he wasn't even remotely on my radar. But when we get off the show, I'm going to look into some of his numbers, because if you can get him at 3,000 or 3,500, and with LeBron out, if he's going to play 30 minutes, I mean, you could get 25, 30 fantasy points out of him as a min-price guy. So, like I said, I haven't looked at the numbers. I don't know exactly how he does with LeBron out when he sees 25 or 30 minutes, or if he even will see that. But he's a guy that I'm going to look at once we get off the show and try to get a better handle on, because I think he's a viable option now for dirt cheap.
Yeah, in extended minutes, sometimes I don't like him when he plays with LeBron because he doesn't have a large enough role. But now without LeBron, you'd have to think that he's got to factor into the offense and score 10 to 12 points by accident if he's going to play some big minutes. So I agree with you on Shumpert. If he's the bare minimum, that makes him certainly interesting. Let's move on to small forward. I think this one is really interesting tonight. I think we're going to have some serious disagreement here. We're all going to agree on Durant. So, Collacchi, why don't you start with talking about him? But after that, I think it's going to get pretty interesting with some of the names I have on the list.
Now, we talked earlier about Marcus Smart getting the start and having Kevin Durant duties. We all loved Kevin Durant anyway because of that matchup against Boston. Now, especially without Jay Crowder, there's nobody athletically or physically that can match up with Durant, especially not Marcus Smart. So I think for me, he's the play of the night besides Boogie Cousins, who we'll talk about. But right now, I think I'd prefer to go with him over Cousins in cash game just because of the positional scarcity that we talk about. Like I was saying, there's nobody that can match up with Durant. Of course, this game's going to be fast-paced, as earlier, Benny mentioned. So I think a guy like Durant tonight is a guy that you want to pay for. And honestly, with all this value, I think he definitely can slide his way into your cash game lineups.
Yeah. I agree with you. Benny, why don't you give your thoughts on small forward, and then we'll talk about some of my guys.
Yeah, there's a couple cheaper options that I have my eye on as well. A guy that I like, depending on what site you're playing on some sites you can get Nikola Mirotic as a small forward option. He's right around 5K, a guy we talked about last time. You know, again, without Pau Gasol in there, him and Taj Gibson are going to play big minutes. You know, two guys we talked about last time for cash. I still like Mirotic more as a guy that I would use in tournaments. I think he has the chance to have a bigger upside, but I expect to see about 30 minutes out of both of these guys. I expect them both to get around 25 to 35 fantasy points, which, again, for both of them being around 5K, I think they're both viable options as well. As far as other expensive options, there really isn't anybody I'd pay up for. One guy who I think is interesting, and I kind of want to get your take on it because his price to me is very cheap right now, and that's Rudy Gay at only like $6,200 on FanDuel. I think he's like $6,000 on DraftKings. And if you look at his game log, he got hurt. Right before he got hurt, he played a game against San Antonio where, again, Kawhi Leonard defense on the other side. He didn't have a really good game. But then he came back, and in 3 of the last 4 games he's played, he's had like 30 to 35 fantasy points, which gives him like 5 to 6x value based off the price that he's at today. We know that New Orleans is a very high-paced team. That's 2 high-paced teams playing against each other. Should see an absolute ton of points there. And I feel like people are shying away from Rudy Gay because he had a bad game here or there. But, I mean, this is a guy who has consistently given you, 30 to 35 fantasy points all season. His price most of the season has been closer to the 7K range. So you're getting him at about a $1,000 discount to what he has been at for most of the season. I think he's viable here in a game that should see 220-plus points against the New Orleans Pelicans. So he's somebody else that I want to have some exposure to today.
Yeah, Collacchi and I argue about whether or not defensive efficiency is a good grade for daily fantasy purposes, and I think this is a case where it is, where New Orleans only allows the 18th most fantasy points, but they rank second to last in terms of efficiency. So against a good scorer like Rudy Gay, I think you could look to that horrible defensive efficiency and just see how bad they are, and you can take that into consideration. And I think Rudy Gay should have a good enough game to make up for that price tag. So we did kind of allude to it in shooting guards, but I want to talk about my guy at small forward tonight. I think I'm playing him in cash games. Is Jeff Green. I am way all over this guy today. I love this matchup. I mean, how couldn't you? Green plays some small forward, some power forward, mostly small. But next to Umba Mute, he'll play some small forward. Now Paul Pierce has been ruled out, so you don't have to worry about him. And Houston allows the most fantasy points to both positions, small forward and power forward. So that's not an issue in terms of matchup. I mean, you look at his game log, and some people may be off of him because you look at a bad game. And it wasn't even that bad if you were watching. I mean, Green was pretty money on his shooting last night against Kawhi Leonard and probably the best defensive team in terms of team defense in the league in the Spurs. And the game before that, he faced LeBron James. But you look at his 2 games before that, I mean, back-to-back 33 fantasy point outings. So now we're talking about, 2 decent matchups. He went off, 2 matchups against, some pretty solid opponents, and he was mediocre, and now you're talking about the best possible matchup he can have. So I think, his price, $4,500 on DraftKings. To me, I circled that one, $8,400 on Fantasy Draft. It's just too cheap. And even if you think Redick's going to have a big game, I think both of them can. I mean, I expect this Clippers team to score about 110 points. I mean, this Rockets team cannot defend, so I think there's plenty of production for all of them. I really like this Clippers-Rockets game as a whole, and I really like this Clippers team. Do you think you could use Jeff Green in cash, either of you?
I don't hate it. I really don't, because I think that the fact that his price is so low is going to give him the opportunity to reach 5, 6 times value, even 7 times value if he plays a lot. It's one of those situations where a guy will literally have to be bad or just have a ridiculously low usage to not get to his value tonight. And I like to take chances on those guys because I think the fact that he is a talented player playing in a really good matchup in a fast-paced game, it's something that's definitely circled for sure. Now, the thing with him is he's really cheap, so I think my pivot from him, especially in tournaments, is going to be Michael Beasley tonight. We talked about this guy on Monday. He's one of my favorite players, oddly enough, because he doesn't play defense, right, Ricky? That's how I look at players in the NBA. But basically, Beasley has averaged 1.3 fantasy points per minute since signing with the Rockets. He has 1.6 and 1.8 fantasy points per minute in 2 of the last 4 games, and he's been over 1 fantasy point per minute in all those last 4 games. And the thing about the Clippers is they do not defend the power forward or the small forward well when you look at them when they're running. Now, Blake Griffin there, it's a little bit different, but he's not there. They have guys like Jeff Green, Mbah Moute is there, and Paul Pierce, who is out. So there isn't anybody that can lock him down. And like we've seen with Beasley before, when he's on the floor, he's shooting. And he played 27 minutes in the last game. So I think this is kind of a perfect storm for a GPP play because he definitely has big upside.
Yeah, there's a little bit of news that just came out. First of all, Elfrid Payton is questionable, so I don't know if we want to mess around with Skiles on the early lock sites. I think Jennings has to be tournament only at best on those sites at this point. That being said, Vucevic and Ilyasova are out, so their big men are still in play. And then Allen Anderson out and Bradley Beal in, which I think is a good news. They're both good news for John Wall because it not only solidifies his production, but now he's got a guy who they have to focus on outside of Wall. I'm pretty sure Butler's going to be on Beal now, so you got nothing to worry about with Wall. I think he's a monster play, and that pretty much solidified it. Let's go through a few other names we hadn't talked about. How about Carmelo Anthony for tournaments? I mean, everyone's worried about this 15-point spread, and honestly, you should be. But if we're thinking game theory, Golden State the last few weeks hasn't exactly blown people out of the water consistently, at least over the last 3 weeks or so. There's been some surprising teams that have played them close. And if the Knicks, they don't even have to play them close. If they keep it within 15, in the fourth quarter where they're within striking range at the end, Melo might play a full assortment of minutes against a very fast-paced team. And it kind of shows in his history against them. He's had 43-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 meetings against them. It's tough in terms of defensive efficiency. I mean, whoever they have on him is going to be a good defender. But he's stepped up in terms of assists this season, in terms of rebounds. He's kind of become an all-around player. At 8,600, which is kind of where he normally is, I think that's not accounting for the pace in this game. So if it remains close, he could actually, murder that price tag, I think. It's risky because he could also produce, 25, 30 fantasy points if they get blown out, but I think that's someone you want to look to for the upside. Another guy, if Lance Stevenson's out, I kind of like Alex Stevenson for close to minimum, just because Memphis has basically no one. If we mention Briante Weber, we got to mention Alex Stevenson in the same breath. I mean, not very good player, but he's going to be on the court, so that's my basis for liking him. That's the start and end of it, because there isn't much more to say about the guy. And Harrison Barnes, Iguodala is still out, so I think if you're going the other way on that and you think that Golden State's going to blow him out, I think Barnes could be on mop-up duty at the end and play a decent amount of minutes. One other guy who just popped up was Chandler Parsons, now that there's no LeBron James. Do you guys think he could be in consideration now? Because, the reason we avoid small forwards against them is LeBron. With them going smaller, is Chandler Parsons a play at 6,400 on DraftKings?
I want to go ahead, Benny. I want to mention this game too, so go ahead.
All right, no, I was going to say, I mean, for me, he's still a tad pricey. Him basically, and I don't want to, we'll get to it at power forward, but there's a power forward on Dallas who's been doing a little bit of scoring lately that I think I'd rather have over Parsons right now. I don't hate him at this price, and I do like the fact that he's going to be up there without LeBron. And so he's a better play than he was, but I think he's more of a cash game guy because I haven't really seen a big 50-point upside game or 45-point upside game out of him recently. I don't think he's doing a lot more other than hitting open jumpers in the corner and adding in a few stats. And I just wanted to add one other thing about small forward here. I was a big fan of Doug McBuckets at the beginning of the day, and the reason behind it was we talked about it in the video this morning. If Dunleavy was out, that gives him a lot of minutes, and then if Powell and Derrick Rose are out, that gives him a bump in usage. Well, Dunleavy is definitely in, so the minutes are kind of gone now. So even if Powell and Derrick Rose are out and he's going to get, a little bump in usage, he's not going to be playing the same big minutes with it. So I don't think Dunleavy is going to be on my radar basically at min price, and I don't think Dougie McBuckets is on my radar anymore either. So for those guys who saw the video this morning, I'm taking him off my list now that I know Dunleavy's playing.
Collacchi, you had something to say?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that game, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on it, that being the Cavaliers and the Mavericks. Both of these teams have been playing at a much faster rate lately. We know about Zaza Pachulia getting a bunch of rest before the potential playoff run that the Mavericks can make. We know about LeBron James being out. The Cavaliers are starting Iman Shumpert and Tristan Thompson to go along with Kyrie Irving, J.R. Smith, and Kevin Love. That is a lineup built to run. And we're going to look at the Mavericks probably starting Raymond Felton again at the 2, meaning that they're going to have essentially 3 guards with him, Wesley Matthews, and their point guard, Darren Williams. They're going to be playing with Parsons and Dirk, and that's a lineup to run as well. Coming off the bench are some guys that can run just like that as well, especially for the Cavaliers, and a guy that plays a lot in fast-paced games, Channing Frye. So I think this is a game in GPPs that you want to take a look at because it's going to be between 2 very fast-paced teams, and with LeBron out, this game is definitely going to get closer in spread. That news just came out 10 minutes ago, and the line's already moved in favor of Dallas by 2.5 points.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. If Nowitzki's playing center, I think I like that matchup less for him, as Tristan's a pretty physical defender, although, Dirk can get it done against everyone. But I got to look at, Parsons and Dirk, because I was firmly on Dirk before that, and now I'm not 100% sure. Here's a hilarious lineup note. How about this one for Scott Skiles, you guys? Brandon Jennings will start regardless of Elfrid Payton's status. So even if Elfrid plays, we're going to have Jennings starting. Now what the hell do we do?
I mean, I think that only makes me like him more. I still would rather Elf Payton be out. That would be the news that I'm really looking for. But at least we know if Elf Payton is out now that we don't have to worry about the question of Jennings versus Watson. Skiles has kind of made that definitive statement for us that it's going to be Jennings. And I think Jennings kind of made that definitive statement himself with the way he played last night. Putting up 35 fantasy points is not an easy thing to do, and his price is still $3,700. That's a guy that can give you 10x value. Anytime a guy is able to give you close to 10x value, you got to respect him and at least take a look at him for your lineups.
Yeah, one other piece of news, Derrick Rose playing, so that's happening tonight. I don't really see considering him in any format. He's too risky, not a great matchup. I guess the pace is nice, but I'd still rather Jimmy Butler. Let's move on to power forwards. Is there really much else to say besides DeMarcus Cousins? I mean, is it kind of a mic drop? Does anyone else like anyone else at the power forward, at least in cash, alongside Cousins?
I like Marvin Williams, but real quick, Elfrid Payton now said he's not playing tonight, so there you go. Brandon Jennings, fire him up a little bit.
all the Brandon Jennings.
Yeah, so Jennings is starting. He's definitely doesn't have to worry about those minutes behind him from Elfrid Payton being taken, so he's a fine play there, especially in tournaments. But I wanted to talk about Marvin Williams a little bit, also in that game, because Orlando is 25th against opposing power forwards. He has 27 or more FanDuel points in 6 of his last 7 games. He's under 6,000, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be rostering that level of power forward, especially on DraftKings where you have DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, who I think both of them are absolutely terrific plays. So I wanted to mention Williams, especially for tournaments, but I do think he's a fine cash play if you wanted to kind of punt that position compared to other people because they're going to be spending up. And of course, Taj Gibson, rather, I can't even put that together, and Bobby Portis. I don't think Portis. Go ahead. I don't think Portis is a cash play because with Dunleavy back, Mirotic could take those 4s. And Ricky, you got to mention Gibson because if I say it, it's going to be all just different verbs and adjectives are going to come out. So just talk about Gibson. Go ahead, take it.
Schmosh Mipson, as you said it.
Taj Schnipson. Yeah.
I like Gibson. I don't love the individual matchup, but what I do like about him, again, is the fact that the minutes are going to be extended. As really, I mean, you look at that roster, unless you like Cristiano Felicio, he's pretty much all they got at center. I guess they could use Portis at center as well. But in a matchup against a team that they probably want to beat, that they're fighting for a playoff spot for, they're going to go with their best player. I mean, in terms of real basketball, Gibson is the much better player in terms of anyone else we're talking about. The Mirotiches, the Portises, those kind of guys. So I think, to match up defensively against Gortat, and, he's a pretty solid offensive player as well, even though it doesn't necessarily show up in the box score all the time. I think Gibson's going to play. The problem is his price went up, what was it the other day, $4,400? It went up $500 more, so that caps his upside even more. A great game for Taj Gibson is what he did last game, like a 15 and 10 double-double. And I don't even think you can expect that every game, especially in a more difficult matchup. So now we're talking, 12 and 8, and, you're kind of hoping for him to hit value. And I don't love it. I think it's fine for cash because I think the minutes are going to be there. If he blocks 4 shots, all of a sudden now we're talking. But his upside is capped, as you guys have mentioned before. Anyone else have any other thoughts? Benny, you want to go into some other power forwards?
Yeah, depending on what site. I like Jared Sellinger a little bit. I just found out Kelly Olynyk is in now too. That's why I've had this sour puss on my face because I had to go back and kind of look at some of these lineups that I had Sellinger in. I mean, Sellinger had been playing really well and his price is really cheap, so I thought he was going to be in a pretty good spot today. But the Olynyk news definitely dampens that. I think we also have to take a look at Jason Smith, who's listed as a power forward on a bunch of sites. Had 31 and 41 in 2 of his last 3 games. Also threw up a stinker where he only had 8 points. But remember, they're playing without Vucevic. We also just found out that Ilyasova's out too. So you got to figure that we're going to see a bump in minutes for Jason Smith. We're also going to probably see some extra minutes for Aaron Gordon. Gordon's gotten a little expensive, so I'm a little less sure of the upside that he'll have. But Jason Smith is still very cheap. Basically min price or a couple $100 off the floor on most sites. If he's going to be playing 30 minutes or 25 to 30 minutes, like I said, he put up 31 and 41 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. Another one of those guys that at 3K or 3,500 can give you 9-10x value. You got to respect that. So without the 2 big guys that we know are going to be out now in Ilyasova and Vucevic, I think we got to start considering Jason Smith a little bit as a viable punt option as well.
Agreed. Just want to, go back to the fact that DeMarcus Cousins, by far the best play, probably on the entire slate. Against the Pelicans team, he dropped 75 fantasy points against last week. I agree with you on Jason Smith. I think now without Ilyasova as well, there's less of a chance. I mean, who can he really Scott Skiles him for? And I use Scott Skiles as a verb for benching people who should be in the game, because that's kind of how it's come with him. I liked Nowitzki. I'm a little more sour on him. I'm still going to use him in tournaments because he's coming off 3 straight 40-point fantasy games, but I don't like the matchup nearly as much. I got to look a little more into Chandler Parsons, and I wanted to mention Draymond Green, who I think his price has come down to a spot where I kind of like it. You look at their basically their averages against the Knicks. He's gotten it done. He averages basically 3 times value at his current price on fantasy draft, which is interesting. So I think that a lot of people are going to be looking at Curry because Calderon versus opposing point guards, there's no chance he stays with him. But I don't think the matchup's great for Clay. I don't necessarily think Bogut needs to play a lot of minutes because Robin Lopez, may or may not. So I like Draymond Green. I think that's a guy who could push a triple-double tonight. I think I would save it for tournaments. But again, on fantasy draft, averaging 3 times his price and 3 times is what you look for at least your upper-priced guys. So that was interesting to me that his price is down to $14,100. Does anyone have anything else to say? Maybe Anthony Davis we probably should mention, although you worry about some minutes against Boogie and foul trouble, but he still had 50 fantasy points against Sacramento last week. So for tournaments, I think you can do it, but I have no reason to spend up on him over DeMarcus Cousins, in cash games. Anything else from any of you guys at power forward, or should we move on?
I wanted to mention Channing Frye. I know that sounds weird on a slate like this, but I do think he's a viable tournament option because in this fast-paced game, like we mentioned, Tristan Thompson's not necessarily going to have to be needed to play on the perimeter to defend Dirk Nowitzki. We know Dirk is not a guy that camps out in the paint all day long. So I think it could be a game where Channing Frye plays a little bit more minutes. We know about his ability to shoot, and Dirk is not very quick. So he's not necessarily a guy that could be chasing Frye around the wings. So I did want to mention him. His price is very close to minimum on basically every site. So I do think he's a viable option, especially on FanDuel, if you wanted to pair him with an Anthony Davis. And that just gives you another cheap option to fit all of the top studs for your lineup.
There you go. Let's move on to center. I think this is a very difficult position tonight. We were discussing before the show. I think we all believe in the double center tonight because there's a conundrum for all of us. It involves, let's even bring it to 3 players. We were talking about 2. Karl Anthony Towns, Andre Drummond, and Dwight Howard. What the hell do you do here between them? Because I think they stick out as the best options. Benny, why don't you take this?
Yeah. Well, here's the way I want to talk about it. Let's talk about the matchup for each one of them first. You got Andre Drummond going up against Atlanta. He's faced Atlanta twice this year. One of the things we always say about Al Horford, he's a very good player, but he's a little undersized. He's basically 6'9", 6'10" kind of guy playing center. He's really a power forward who plays center on that team. When he faces the true centers, the big, strong, 7-foot type guys that weigh that have 20, 30 pounds on him, he tends to struggle. And we've seen that with Drummond this year. 2 games this year, Drummond has 49.5 fantasy points and 48.25 fantasy points. So he's basically put up 50 against them both times. Drummond's price has come down now to the point where his price is a little bit below 8K on DraftKings. So he's basically, if he gets back to that average of 48.5, 48 3/4 points that he's had in the 2 games, you're looking at a 6X value guy there from him. So that's the case for Drummond. Now you go over to Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard's going up against the Clippers. Again, another team that he's put up some pretty good numbers against. These guys talked earlier today about the way they try to defend Harden. They try to defend Harden by doubling him, and when you double, what basically winds up happening is it goes into like a scramble drill. So if you ever played basketball before, coach will put 3 guys out there on defense and 4 shooters on the outside, and as the ball gets moved around, everybody just rotates over to take the open man and take the open shooter. So if everybody's running out at all these shooters on the perimeter, the way that Houston plays right now, they put 4 guys on the outside and they put Dwight Howard on the inside. So he's going to be one-on-one in rebounding situations that way, and he's also going to be the guy that winds up being the one that they leave open every once in a while. Other than basically DeAndre Jordan, they don't have another guy on their team over like 6'7". I mean, Emba Mute is playing the power forward spot for them, and he's about a 6'5" guy. So even if he has to rotate onto Dwight Howard, if you dump it down to Howard in the post, he should be able to go up and score some baskets in that game. Plus, I think he'll have a big rebounding game. So I like both of them. I'm not as much on Towns today, and part of the reason for that is you're getting about a $1,000 discount by going down to Dwight Howard and Andre Drummond from Karl Anthony Towns in most spots, which is really the only reason why I'm not on him. It's not like I don't like Towns. He's been an absolute stud, although he has kind of cooled off a little bit lately from the guy that we saw putting up 50 fantasy points on a nightly basis. So for me, it's kind of Drummond and Dwight Howard, unless one of you can convince me of a reason why I should have Towns in that threesome as well.
No arguments from me, that's for sure. I don't think that it's one of those nights where I'm on FanDuel and DraftKings, and I clicked on 3 centers, and it kept coming up as error, so that's disappointing for me. But I know on Fantasy Draft, I'm going to literally try to get all 3 of them in. I just made a lineup with Cousins, Durant, Drummond, and Dwight Howard, and I don't hate it. So it's possible to do that. I know, especially with Brandon Jennings Brandon Jennings starting, not injury. Nobody freak out. So I think that playing those 2 centers, Cousins and Howard, it's an excellent way to approach a lot of your games, especially cash, and I really love that combo for tournaments as well. So no argument for me, and I'm with you, Benny. I love Towns, but I just can't not play Cousins and Dwight Howard.
Yeah, the reason I like Towns, I guess I'll make the case for him, is because compared to the other guys, he's got a little bit more of an all-around game. I mean, I think he'll give you some more assists, he'll give you some steals, he'll give you everything, and the fact that this is a 3.5-point spread is interesting to me. I mean, it basically shows just how not good Vegas believes Minnesota is, because Memphis is going to be playing without everyone, and maybe that's even an inkling that they think Lance Stevenson's going to play, because I think Lance Stevenson right now is their best player with what they got left. But 3.5 points at Memphis, the total's kind of high, and all they got really to defend him is, Ryan Hollins, JaMychal Green, a combination of that, and it takes a good defender to slow down Karl Anthony Towns. I know he's only a rookie, but he's still a monster. And I think that, everyone's going to look at Memphis DVP, and I don't think DVP can be used because I think they're pretty weak against big, towering centers, especially versatile ones like Karl Anthony Towns, who can hit a mid-range. He could post up on you. I just think there's a lot of ways he can beat you, but I agree with you. I mean, Dwight Howard's the one whose numbers really stick out to me. I look at his last game, and it's ridiculous, and I know it's a one-game sample, so I'll give you some more than that. But his game log versus the Clippers this season, they've all been 20 and 10 double-doubles. In fact, 2 of them have been 20-20 double-doubles. That's a little ridiculous. So we're looking 20-20, 22-14, and last game he had 36 and 26. And part of the reason I think that's actually sustainable is because of the Harden thing we discussed earlier, but I also think it's because he shot 18 and 16 free throws in the past 2 games. And these coaches kind of get what Collacchi likes to call comparing their junk, put it out on the table and seeing who's got the longer one, because they'll go hack a Drummond, hack a Jordan back and forth. not to Drummond, Howard and Jordan, and it just won't stop in these games. The game actually gets really boring to watch because it's back and forth, but that actually creates a lot more opportunities for both centers. And even though they're 40% free throw shooters, I mean, the guy's taking 10 more shots than he should. That can only help.
Yeah, plus with the two of them missing free throws on the other side and the two of them being the best rebounders, they're also pulling down boards when that happens, and the clock is stopping. So they're scoring fantasy points without the clock moving, which is always a good thing. So I said this before, people say, oh, I'll never play Dwight Howard because they're going to do hack a Dwight, or I'll never play DeAndre because they're going to do hack a DeAndre. I don't care. We don't lose points in fantasy for missed free throws. If he's going to take 20 free throws in a 2-minute stretch, even if he hits 40%, well, that's an extra 8 or 9 points. And if he grabs one of the rebounds on the misses on the other side, or two of the rebounds or gets a block shot, I mean, in that 2-minute stretch, he could put up 12 or 13 fantasy points for you. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yep, I agree. I just want to mention some value centers, even though I doubt I use much of either, but they are on my radar. Willie Cauley-Stein for tournaments. I think he's going to start to match up against Anthony Davis in terms of size this time. He didn't last time, but I think they got to go that route. The only problem is, sort of like Cousins, he could get in foul trouble defending Davis. And then I think one of the bigs for Oklahoma City could have a nice game in the battle of two teams, top and pace. I actually think it screams to be a Canner game, but, he's always best left for tournaments. But that being said, if they get up or if he comes in and provides some instant offense, they tend to leave him in, and he could put up a double-double pretty quickly, and he is only 4,800 on DraftKings, so that's a tournament only. Anyone else on your radar at center, or are we pretty much focusing around the monsters?
I wanted to mention Cantor as well because he popped up in my research. It's just that his price on the site that I do my piece on for RotoCurve is $5,100 on FanDuel. So I think you're going to be reaching for him to get 7 times value. 6 times value seems like his ceiling because, honestly, he's going to play 20 minutes. 30 FanDuel points is an excellent game. But considering he's over 5,000, that 6x might be his absolute ceiling. So for me, I can't do it.
I agree with you. All right, that is all for our analysis today. I just want to go through some guys that we liked. I know at the point guard, Isaiah Thomas was one for me. We liked Westbrook in tournaments. We liked John Wall and Holiday. I think that's pretty much consensus. And now we like Brandon Jennings. Shooting guard was a little iffy. We all kind of like our own guys, so I don't even really have anyone to review there since we were all kind of in a different direction. Small forward, we're all on Durant. We all kind of liked Gay. We all liked Beasley in tournaments, and I really like Jeff Green. Power forward, we were all firmly on Cousins. I think we all agree that he's the one guy you should get into your cash lineup if at all possible. And then we, Jason Smiths, and we like some sporadic other players. And then center, we're firmly on Andre Drummond and Dwight Howard. Let's get to the bold calls, you guys. Let's start with you, Collacchi. What do you got for us tonight? Let's make it extra bold. Not just bold. Let's make it extra, super duper mucho bold.
All right. Well, I have 2 for you. The first one is Marvin Williams, 20 and 10. I wrote that up this morning. But my other one, I think this is the one that's kind of a little bit bold. Steph Curry is going to score 60 real points tonight against Phil Jackson, who thinks he stinks. I don't know why, but Phil Jackson doesn't love Steph Curry. He's just another shooter. He compared him to some guys that really weren't that good of NBA players. So Steph Curry, 60 burger tonight.
The best tweet I saw today was from Robin Lundberg of ESPN tweeting, interested to see how Knicks deal with Abdul Rauf tonight, because Phil Jackson said that Curry was basically the same player. So I love that tweet. I hope he drops 60 on him, because as much as I love Phil Jackson from his Bulls days, he needs to shut his mouth with Curry. Benny, what do you got for us in terms of bold?
All right, I'm going to give you 3 of them tonight because these are 3 guys that I'm building a lot of lineups around. I think Russell Westbrook gets you 65 fantasy points, so don't shy away from him. I know people think that's a tough matchup, and it is a tough matchup, but he's still Russell Westbrook. He's still one of the most unstoppable forces in the league. And then I think if you need to fit him, somebody sent me one of our viewers sent me a message today. It was like, I saw your video. I saw you like Westbrook. How am I supposed to fit him in there? Where are the value guys? So the 2 value guys that I'm using to make sure I can fit him in there, I like Jason Smith and I like Brandon Jennings with the Orlando Magic. I think you put Jennings and Smith in there, and you're going to get 30 and 40 fantasy points out of the 2 of them. So Jennings and Smith get me 70 combined. Westbrook gets me 65. And there's 135 points from 3 of the 8 guys in your roster. So now just figure out how to get 200 out of the other 5 guys. And you got about $33,000 to do that with, and you'll be at the top of the charts tonight.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm going bold with 2 guys combined too, and you just gave 70 fantasy points to 2 guys cheaper than the guys I'm going to mention. So I'm going to go a little bit bolder. I'm going to go you get 80 fantasy points combined from Jeff Green and J.J. Redick tonight. I think they both are in great spots. I think that they're going to do a lot of the scoring. Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan played decent minutes last night, but it was kind of a tough game against San Antonio, so they're on a back-to-back. Their minutes, not great on back-to-back, so I think that, some other guys will have to step up. Redick dropped 40 real points last time, so it might not be that bold. I think Redick and Jeff Green both have nice games. I think there's a possibility the winning GPP lineup could have both of them. How about that for both DraftKings and FanDuel? I love that game tonight. We are the Daily Pivot on RotoCurve. Again, I want to mention there's a PGA free roll this week. It's rotocurve.com/free roll. And also, don't forget to check out the NBA tools, the PGA tools. You can tweet us at RotoCurve. I know at least I will be in the chat room talking about lineups after this. Benny's got to go coach some baseball. Collacchi's who knows what he's going to do. He's got some guy building a house behind him, so he's probably just going to go bang his head against the wall in annoyance. But until next time, we're out.